Welcome to Eye Openers Provocative Images. This posting emphasizes the importance of facies, that is, faces that talk to you. It is known that observers with experienced eyes, such as artists, can see far more signals in objects or individuals than ordinary persons. Here the example is a portrait by Gauguin, who, although he did not know medical notions at the time and could not knit or synthesize the signs he was observing into signals, that is, an interpretation through knowledge, he did nonetheless portray correctly a face as a facies that today's experts will often associate with Down syndrome. This is an illustration that, in quote, to see, close quotes, one has to combine the ability to notice with the cerebral capacity to metamorphose a sign into a meaningful signal. In this presentation, we emphasize the role of fine arts and the ability of artists to express their visual acuity, an ability to emphasize signs that they consider of particular importance. In this instance, an artist of which we know very little portrays one among many individuals as distinct. He does so by illustrating his face as being different, thus being stigmatic. Granted that at the time nobody could define the nature of this facies. It was only during the past century that it became clear that children with trisomy 21 had a characteristic facies. So we will continue to show you examples in this manner. Here we show a second individual by the same artist in the same painting. And although this facies of Down syndrome is characteristic, it is different nonetheless from the one we just showed before. So there is a commonality of these stigmatic features, but at the same time there is room for individuality. For every patient with Down syndrome or every human being have distinct facies, and that provides a basis for us to distinguish them one from the other. Here the artist chose to emphasize a slight upward slant of the palpebral fissure, the relatively shortness of the nose and the flat bridge, and also that the corners of the mouth are somewhat lower than the midpoint of the lower lip. In this depiction, Joseph Wertelecki chose to emphasize the apparent larger distance between the eyes, which in medical terminology is called ocular hypertelorism, the relatively smallness of the ears, and the protrusion of the tongue. I forgot to mention that Wertelecki also emphasizes the shortness and smallness of the nose. It is relevant to point out that Joseph Wertelecki, a native from Vienna, virtually single-handedly established the medical scientific discipline of teratology. And in this final depiction is a facies of a Down syndrome infant. It was drawn by a handicapped young lady who held a pencil in her mouth and placed these dots on a blank sheet of paper to emphasize the bilateral epicanthic folds and slight upward slant of the palpebral fissure that called her attention. She also shows that the nose of the bridge is flat and the tip of the nose is short and slightly upturned. To close this presentation, I offer the following synthesis. Artists train their eyes to note distinct features of what they seek to portray. Otherwise, all paintings would be like photographs. The facies conveys a greater and separate signal than the sum of its parts. In itself, the facies can be indicative of a cause, a process, or a diagnosis, a concept that includes prognosis and preventive medicine. Viewers can find representations of facies in multiple eye-opener postings and in a short tutorial about it. We rely on Down syndrome as a prototype for the notion of facies and for the notion of dysmorphology. Eye-opener companion sites offer considerations related to diagnosis, but eye-openers per se does not emphasize diagnostic issues and instead emphasizes the visual necessity to recognize dysmorphic signs. Note that aspects of medical terminology are emphasized in these presentations by words in italics. You may find roots and meanings of medical terms in Pandora Word Box. And now it's time to say goodbye and wish you well.